I thought about making this particular video recently, but I got a little bit sidetracked when the Vanguard Alpha came out. Now that the hype for that has kind of died down, I think it's time we had a talk. You might be thinking to yourself from the title, did Dragon's Breath get buffed? Did the Model 680 get buffed? And the answer to that is not directly, but in a way, yeah, they kind of did. Not just with the Model 680 with Dragon's Breath, mind you, but all the Dragon's Breath shotguns. How? Well, it's because of this perk right here. The only way to counter this and being zapped through walls is cold-blooded, and when you run cold-blooded, you can't run EOD. You see where I'm going with this? Since EOD is not the obvious perk one choice anymore, that means you have more chances of running into players who don't have EOD equipped. This means that your Dragon's Breath shotguns just got more usable. Now, the reason I bring up the 680 in particular with this video is because it's often overlooked, and I think there's a good reason to put it in the spotlight for this video with Dragon's Breath equipped. Now, I did mention in my last video I was going to do a separate video on my thoughts on the Call of Duty Vanguard Alpha shotguns, but I figured I would just tack it on to the end of this video since it would only be a minute or two long. So with that being said, check the timestamps in the description below if you want to jump to a certain part of the video, and let's get into it. The way that EOD works with Dragon's Breath is it basically decreases that overall effectiveness of how the burn works on players and basically does less damage overall. It kind of makes the Dragon's Breath shotguns just a tad bit more inconsistent, which if you're using the Dragon's Breath shotgun can be pretty frustrating at times. It doesn't seem to do really much to armor plates regardless of EOD, but with normal health, something that takes say 30-ish points of damage from a burn is going to take more like 5 to 10 overall. So it's really effective for stopping things that burn or even blow up from killing you. Now I went ahead and grabbed a screenshot of the burn damage with EOD equipped compared to without it. And you can see without EOD you can do about 10-ish more points of damage. But generally the shotguns that have it, Dragon's Breath is almost always a go-to attachment with the exception of the Marshall pistol. I kind of don't like that thing too much. And if you want overall more damage, Dragon's Breath is generally the way to go despite getting a little bit less range overall. So one of the big takeaways from this video I can tell you right now is that if you want your shotgun to be as useful as ever, now is the time with Dragon's Breath in particular. Since more people are going to run cold-blooded, less people are going to run EOD, which means your shotgun will behave a lot more consistently than it normally would. So it almost got sort of this indirect buff. It's not a straight buff, obviously, but since no one's going to run it as much, you have a chance with these things. And I also think mentally it helps because when you shoot someone and see that EOD symbol, it always messes with me. I hate to be that guy since I know Dragon's Breath can be so annoying to die to, but you know, let's be real. And I'm sure all the sweat lords out there will be angry as all get, but if you want viability and shotguns, now is the time. This leads me to my next topic, which is the Model 680 in particular. My boy is in a great place to be because of this. Did it get buffed secretly? No, not really at all. But this EOD situation makes the 680 even better. And I know I've talked about this gun before in the past, but I really want to show you guys how nasty this thing really can be, especially now with Dragon's Breath. The thing I want to point out first about the Model 680 is that without Dragon's Breath, it's kind of a bad shotgun. I mean, it's got potential, it's still got power. I mean, you can really make it work. You can drop some crazy kills if you're a professional player, but if you're an average Joe or just slightly above average, this is probably going to be a really, really difficult gun to make work. I know it is for me when I actually get into a real game. In Plunder, I'm like blasting people left and right, but once I get into a real game, I'm getting 2-3 hit markers and then dying, so it's really difficult to make work. You have to be weaving in and out of cover, but what makes this thing better? Dragon's Breath, and I have a feeling more people will probably gravitate towards Dragon's Breath because slugs are really difficult to make work. So with Dragon's Breath, the big thing here is that your 2-shot kill range with and even without EOD is god tier in Warzone, and I know I always talk about 2-shot kill ranges and being ridiculous and all that yada yada, but this really is the best one that we have so far, as long as you're not talking slugs. The 2-shot potential with the Sport Barrel and the Marauder Suppressor, so basically fully decked out for range, and if you hit your shots well, is 11 meters. That is pretty much it on the nose, and just take a second to think about that. 11 meters is the best 2-shot range we have for these shotguns that aren't using slugs, and while the 680 doesn't have that fast time to kill, with it being around 857 milliseconds for 2 shots because of that 70 rounds per minute fire rate, this thing makes up for it in range and tremendous stopping power. But let's be real, you still gotta play well and be a movement god, and in my gameplay, which is in Plunder obviously, you'll see I generally duck in and out of cover a lot. This is a really great strategy overall with this gun, and I gotta remind you all to stop sleeping on it with Dragon's Breath in particular. While you can hit some crazy ranged shots with the Marauder Suppressor and the Sport Barrel, I generally don't run these two together because my aim down sights time gets really slow, and so does the movement speed since they both hurt it. So instead, usually I just use the Marauder by itself and use sleight of hand instead of a barrel or something like that, or the Marauder and the Liberator barrel if you want some good range, and that doesn't mess with the movement speed at all. Now, I'll give you guys two classes. The more overall best rounded class for range and speed is the first one. Just use the Marauder, which is about 24% more range, and then use the XRK grip for a faster aim down sights time, 5mW laser, Dragon's Breath of course, and no stock. The ranged class, you can use the Marauder, the Sport Barrel, 5mW laser, no stock, and Dragon's Breath. If this is too slow, just swap out that Sport Barrel for the Liberator barrel, or like I do, take off the barrel entirely and use sleight of hand or use a grip or something like that. Now this is just for the Model 680, but for the other Dragon's Breath shotguns, they work fine too, and they're gonna work as good as they ever have. But this one is usually overlooked because of the slow fire rate, and I wanted to give it another bite of the spotlight, so check it out. I would say that the Jak-12 and the VLK Rogue are also going to be really good, and the R90 is as well, but it's always been a pretty unforgiving and inconsistent gun. But hey, if you like any of these guns, now is the time to use them. But I'm telling you guys right now, if you really want power and range, use the 680 with Dragon's Breath. Do not sleep on it. Yes, it's still hard to use, but it's a lot more rewarding, I promise you that. And since not as many people are running EOD, like I was saying, these are going to be more effective than ever. And so really guys, try it out and let me know if you run into as many people with EOD or not. And that's basically going to be it for this particular video. If you just wanted the Dragon's Breath information and stuff like that, you are free to leave now. But I do want to mention that in my last video, I said I was going to make a whole separate video about the shotguns in Call of Duty Vanguard and my thoughts on them in the alpha. So instead of doing a whole video on them, I just figured I'd talk for a few minutes about them and tag them onto this video here. Overall, the two shotguns we had in the alpha, which was the full auto loading shotgun, or rather just the auto loading shotgun, I think is what it was called, and the revolving shotgun. The revolving shotgun was the better of the two. It had the range and the power. It was semi-auto, but the two shotguns overall had such crazy recoil. It made these things really difficult to use. And really, that's my big problem with them. Until we have the beta and we can actually kit them out with attachments, I would say the recoil was the biggest thing keeping me from using these things in the alpha so much, because it was just such a disadvantage to use them, not to mention the visibility and everything mixed together with that recoil. And then the auto-loading shotgun was also extremely weak and had a crazy wide hip fire spread, and so did the revolving shotgun. I think that the hip spread maybe should be toned down just a tiny bit, but I'm not going to pass too much judgment on them yet because we need to wait till the beta and the full game where we can actually customize them. But even with some of the attachments like the barrels and the grips and stuff like that, the recoil was still on another level of frustrating. I mean, seriously, sometimes it would kick straight 45-degree angle to the right, and then sometimes it would just go straight up. In 5 shots, you were already basically looking straight up. So that's a little too much, and I think that Sledgehammer Games needs to tone it down just a slight bit. But overall, I think that they had the power, or at least the revolving shotgun did, and they did seem to have some good range like these Modern Warfare shotguns. But overall, we need to wait for the beta. But that's finally going to do it for this video. So out of all the topics in hand, let me know down in the comments below, what are your thoughts on all of them? How did you like the shotguns in the alpha? What are your thoughts on this new perk and how it affects EOD being used? What about the Model 680? Are you going to actually try and use it now that I recommended it? And with all that being said, I want to see you guys in the next video.